Hi guys, this is Mike making my first video for iPokerVIP.net. As you can tell by the title screen, this will be an introduction to Heads Up SnG, which is the game that I play. We're going to quickly go over a couple of slides and then jump into some gameplay footage. So first off, why play Heads Up SnG? Heads Up SnG combine the aggressive dynamic of Heads Up Poker with the survival aspect of a tournament, which is something that's obviously unique to only Heads Up SnG. You get a large volume in, and if you couple that with high rakeback, you make a pretty good amount of money without actually having to profit in poker. The action is fairly consistent and pretty soft. Here I wrote he's all yours because when you play any form of heads up, the fish at the table is going to be just for you. If you play a game like 6-max or 9-handed, you have to share the fish with everyone else at the table. It's very possible, in fact very likely, that you won't be the one who stacks the fish, whereas if you play heads up, you're the only one there to stack the fish. And then something that's unique to only Heads Up SnG is they can't sit out. When you sit someone in Heads Up Cash and they don't want to play you, they could just sit out and they don't lose a dime. They can just wait for you to leave and then wait for someone else to sit them. However, in Heads Up SnG, if someone doesn't want to play you, too bad, they have to. And you get to go all in a lot, which is pretty awesome because going all in is very exciting. Who am I? I've been playing poker online and live professionally for the last 3 years. I started playing Heads Up SnG in the beginning of 2011. I reached the merge leaderboard in a little under 3 months. Here are my merge stats. Not quite updated completely. You could still check the 2011 leaderboard for completely updated ones. My microgaming stats are here. I made the leaderboard there as well, but as you can see, it didn't take much to make that leaderboard. And then here are my iPoker stats over the past couple months. The objectives of this video are to create a solid fundamental game plan in which to build upon in future videos. Understand basic ideas on how to adjust to different players' tendencies quickly and effectively. A fundamental game plan in Heads Up is nice, it's really good to have, but the main thing with any form of Heads Up poker, and especially Heads Up SnG, is you have to be able to adjust to your opponent really quickly and really effectively, as I wrote here. One fundamental game plan doesn't work on every single type of opponent. Something that may work against a very tight player may not work against a very loose and aggressive player. So you have to figure out how the player plays quickly and then very quickly adjust your strategy to counter their strategy. And then finally learn the proper use of a HUD in Heads Up SnG. Having a HUD is incredibly important, and being able to use it is even more important. It just allows you to make better adjustments. Preflop Fundamentals. Min raising around 75 to 85% of buttons. To give you an idea of what that looks like, I'll bring up Poker Stove. Opening 75% of our buttons is about here. So all the hands highlighted in purple are going to be the hands we're opening. Excuse me. All the hands highlighted in purple are going to be the hands we're opening. As you get more comfortable, you can start to open more hands. I, for example, open about 90% of my hands, so these are about the hands I open. And against some opponents, I'm even opening 100%. Just like everything else in Heads Up, this is extremely opponent dependent. There are some opponents that are very tight that you'll be opening every single hand against, and there are some opponents that are very aggressive that you'll only be opening the top percentage of hands against. So keep that in mind. And then we should be flatting 30 to 40% of opens from the big blind against a min raise. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, if the opponent is opening a normal amount, as I was just saying, about 75 to 85%, we should be flatting about 30 to 45% of our range. So not including the top hands here, which we're going to obviously be 3-betting. These are the hands we're going to be flatting. Obviously we're also going to be flatting 3s and 2s, we're not going to fold a pair. And then you can flat a couple other hands like King 5, Queen 7, all can be calls, 6-5 suited can be a call, stuff like that. And then we're going to be 3-betting the very top portion of our range, which is going to be about the top 10% of hands. Yeah, that looks about right. Yeah, so we're going to be 3-betting obviously aces through 8s for value, ace king, ace queen, ace jack, king queen, all this stuff we're going to be 3-betting for value, and then that only amounts to about 9.5%, but then when you factor in that you're going to be 3-betting as a bluff some of the time, it'll rise to about 15%, which is the normal amount to be 3-betting. Once again, against certain opponents, this can drastically raise or drastically lower. Flat play and beyond. Continuation betting half pot on dry boards, almost 100% of the time, is the standard. No real reason to c-bet more than half pot unless the opponent is very cally and you have a very good hand. And then c-betting wet boards, double barreling, check raising, all that stuff, they're all incredibly opponent dependent, so I can't really throw them onto a PowerPoint. So we'll just have to get into that during the video and see if any situations come up like that. Let's play some cards. So here I'm bringing up a session I played on iPoker earlier today. I'm playing mostly one table, but occasionally I get a second table going. As you can see here, I have the Sharkscope HUD running, so these are his Sharkscope stats. Excuse me. So this opponent's name is Kazi Wazzy. He's played 78 games, and he's stuck $555 with a negative 17% ROI. So I can assume right off the bat that this opponent's going to be very inexperienced, and he's very likely to have some obvious leaks in his game. And I apologize in advance if there's any long periods of silence. Occasionally there's not too much to talk about, so I might not say anything for a little while if everything seems standard or unexciting. Just checking the King 5 here against his limp. I can check call here against his bet, since he would normally be raising with, as you can see it was a limped pot, he would normally be raising with his ace-X's preflop, and there aren't a ton of 4x and 3x in his range, but against a pretty much completely unknown opponent, we can just fold King High and move on to the next hand. With a little more information, maybe the decision can sway in a different direction. Queen 5 off, pretty normal open. Flop top and bottom pair. We c-bet half pot. This is a board we would also c-bet with our air. It's a fairly dry board. Decent amount of straight draws, but still a very good board to c-bet, and he just folds. As you can see, I'm min-raising as a standard. Once again, occasionally you'll find an opponent that is very stationy preflop. Against those types of opponents, then it's okay to maybe 3x with your good hands, because they're just going to call anyway. Early in the match, however, I'm almost always going to be min-raising. While there's a bit of downtime, I'll go over my HUD real quick. This first number is the amount of hands we've played together. This number right here, the 25, is how often he raises from the button. This is how often he c-bets, double barrels and triple barrels, so it obviously goes in order. This 0.0 is how often they 3-bet preflop. The 50% is how often he calls my opens when I open from the button. The 0 is how often he calls my c-bet. This is how often he calls my turn bet, and this is how often he calls my river bet. Kind of in the same idea as the first line, same order. This is how often he check raises, the 0, and this is how often he donk bets. The other 5 stats, one moment, sorry about this. The other 5 stats are pretty important as well, however they don't come up as quite as often, so if they come up I'll cite what they mean, but until then it's not really important to know. So this guy on the right, very similar to the guy on the left. He's played 102 games, stuck $900, and is in minus 16% ROI. So we can expect more of the same, just an inexperienced player with a decent amount of leaks in his game. We're going to start out against both of these opponents just playing pretty straightforward, because that's usually the best way to beat someone who just has a lot of obvious leaks and is going to make a lot of mistakes. He 3x's here, and pretty standard call with 10-8 suited. We flop a gutter and a backdoor flush draw. And we can normally check call here. However, he pots it. It's just not a great situation, so we just have to fold. If he was to half pot it, we would probably be calling. We just have too many outs to just fold. Sorry about that. But when he pots it, we definitely have to fold. Standard open with ace-3. And he overships for a lot. Obviously, we're not going to call with ace-3 suited, but it's good to know that this opponent's going to be doing things like that, because that's a pretty huge mistake. And if he keeps doing it, we're obviously going to find a pretty good spot against him. Here, I decided to lead this turn with Jack-8 after he doesn't c-bet the flop. It's just not a great spot to be doing this. He c-bets 100% of the time. We've played 33 hands lifetime against each other, and since he c-bets 100% of the time, you'd expect that when he checks back, he doesn't have a very good hand. However, when the bottom card pairs on the turn, it's just not really a great spot for me to stab. He has a lot of 4x in his range, a lot of 5x in his range. He has hands like pocket 6s, pocket 7s, pocket 8s, and he's not going to fold any of that stuff, and he's probably not even going to fold ace high if he has it. So it's just not really a great spot to stab. If the turn was more of a brick card like a 10 or a 9, then stabbing would have been much better. Here, ace-jack, definitely good enough hand to call the 3-bet with. Obviously not going to fold it. It's not quite good enough to 4-bet as for value, so we're just going to flat it. We flop top pair on a pretty drawy board, and he goes ahead and bets 3/4 pot, which is a pretty big bet. Even though it's a very drawy board with a 3 spades, it's not a fantastic situation if we raise and we get it in, because we're not really going to get it in that good too often. If we get in against him, pretty much the best we're going to be is a flip against a hand like ace-king with the ace of spades or something like that. So I think flatting is much better than raising and getting it in. And then on the left, we c-bet and he check-min raises. He's not repping much, but we only have ace high. We can't really continue. I'd expect him to have an 8 here a lot, a hand like 9-10 even, but there's not much we could do other than fold. So we flat on the right, and the turn's a pretty bad card. It's the 4th spade, and it completes a bunch of straights and stuff. We can consider betting the turn and then shoving the river as turning a hand into a bluff, but we can still run into hands like 10 of spades or 8 of spades in his hand, so I'm kind of better off just checking it back. We do still have some showdown value. It's possible our jack is good, so checking back is definitely a safer play. And then when the river brings the 4 card to a straight as well, it's just not really a great spot to turn our hand to a bluff. If he has a king, or ace-king, he should pretty much snap off our river bet, since we don't have many spades in our hand, in our range rather, that we wouldn't have bet the turn with. So we pretty much just have to check back and hope by some miracle we're good, which in this situation we end up being. On the left, we just checked after he limped and then allowed it to check down. It's not really a great spot to stab. We can't really have a hand with any hand with a queen, king, or ace in it, since we probably would have raised it pre-flop, so just gonna give up on that hand. Opening 9-4 off is obviously not the best hand to be opening, but this opponent is so tight from the big blind. He only calls out of the big blind 38% of the time, and he hasn't 3-bet me yet. So because of that, we can pretty much open any 2 cards and show a profit, since he's just folding way too much. And then on this board, it's a very small sample, but he check raises 33% of the time, which is a ton. So we can consider checking back bottom pair. However, if we do check back, we're pretty much giving up on the pot. If he bets the turn and we don't improve. We pretty much just have to fold, and it's kind of a dumb situation. So I prefer just betting and trying to take it down now and making the hand much easier to play. He calls and I turn trips. He leads out really small. When he does this, it's pretty clearly a blocking bet. I'd expect him to have a hand like a weak draw, like a gut shot, maybe a queen, maybe a hand like pocket sixes, and occasionally an ace. Against that range, it's probably better to flat and allow him to either bluff the river or maybe he'll check call the river if it bricks off. So I would have preferred a flat, and I end up raising. Spoiler alert. And then on the right here, this guy 3-bets a pretty good amount, and 10-8 offsuit's a pretty good hand to flat a 3-bet with. However, against an opponent that's this spazzy, I'd prefer to stay out of marginal situations, and a hand like 10-8 offsuit in a 3-bet pot is usually only going to get you into a marginal situation. So I decided to fold it, which is totally fine. And like I said, I do decide to raise on the left. Which, like I said, I do disagree with now. However, one good thing about my raise size is I made it pretty large. The good thing about making it large is, as you can see, I have 840 behind after my raise, and if he were to call the 230 more, the pot would be 1020, which would allow me to shove the river. And if he does have an ace, he's probably not going to be able to get away from it, so we'll be able to get maximum value. Over here, he's opening a pretty decent amount, 68%. And I decided to 3-bet queen jack off. I 3-bet to 5 big blinds as a standard. I just like to make it smaller so I have a little more post-flop maneuverability. However, it's totally fine if you're more comfortable making it 120 or 140 against call-y opponents, since they're just going to call so much anyway. And he just ships it, which obviously just have to fold. So he ships it again over here, just kind of nailing the idea into my head that he's just a pretty huge spaz, and we can find a pretty good spot against him later. King 10 off, it's normally a decent hand to 3-bet. However, after the queen jack hand 2 hands ago, pretty obvious that 3-betting light for value against this opponent isn't that great of an idea. So he snap checks back the jack 6-5 flop. I decided to stab the turn for 3/4 pot, which I like. I have a good amount of outs to make the best hand if I'm not already ahead, and I expect him to fold to this turn bet a lot. And if he doesn't fold to the turn bet, we can often bet the river and get him to fold a hand like a 6 or a 5, or ace high even. He calls and the river's a 6. I would have barreled a river that wasn't like this. I probably would have bet if the river was obviously a king or a queen or a 10. I would have bet for value. But if the river was an ace, a deuce, a 3, I probably would have bet. However, since it paired the 6, there's too much 6x in his range. There's a lot of 5x in his range. And with a river like this, if I bluff at it, he's very likely going to be able to find a call with a 5. He's obviously going to have if he has a 6, he's going to not fold. And if he has ace high, he might not even find a fold on this particular river, so I think giving up is a must. On the left, pretty standard open with ace 4, and he min 3-bets. When someone min 3-bets, you're pretty much never folding. You're just getting too good of a price, 5-1 directly, so you can't really fold. And then on this flop, pretty terrible board for my hand, so I just have to fold. Not the best board, but not the worst to c-bet on the right, so I decide to c-bet, and I take it down. Just checking the 4-6 versus limp. Flop bottom pair. Just gonna try to steer it to showdown. No real reason to bet, not much value in it. I river the straight, the bottom end of the straight. I'm just gonna bet 3/4 pot for value. Hope to get called by a hand like a random pair, or maybe a rivered 2 pair, something like that. And then on the right, I c-bet that 9-8-8 board with ace 7 if you missed it, and he folded. Pair paired boards are very good boards to c-bet because it's obviously tougher to hit them. So c-betting paired boards is almost 100% of the time is pretty standard. On the left here, this guy leads into me for the first time. I have a gutter and a really weak backdoor flush draw, so it's a pretty okay spot to call, see what develops on the turn, possibly take it away, or hit one of our outs. And then on the right, this is one of the worst paired boards, but once again, it's still a paired board, so we're going to be c-betting it. It's one of the worst paired boards, obviously, because it's such a draw-heavy board. There are so many hands have gut shots like 9-7, Queen 10. None of that stuff is going to fold, so it's not the best paired board. But once again, I'm just going to be c-betting it. He double barrels on the left, and we just fold, and he check raises on the right. Once again, just folding. I want to go back to that hand real quick. The 7-3, I raised it pre-flop. Looking at this guy's stats, he 3-bets 37% of the time nearly, which is just way too much for me to be opening 7-3 suited. That's a pretty big mistake for me to be making. He's just going to 3-bet me, and I'm going to have to fold way too often. Basically, he's just going to make my life hell, so I should just be folding a hand like 7-3 pre-flop against this opponent. Alright, glad I folded 10-4 off. That also would have been a pretty bad hand to open. Once again, this opponent, he's loosened up a little bit, but he's still playing fairly tight, so 9-5 suited's an okay hand to open the button with. And not the best, but still a good board to c-bet. We have some backdoor draws that we can double barrel if we hit certain cards. He just checks chips and we're obviously folding. On the right here, he donk pots on a very draw-heavy board, and we have top pair. We can't flat here. The board's just way too draw-heavy. There's way too many terrible turn cards for my hand, so we just have to fast play it and hope he spazzes out somehow or gets it in with a worse hand. I decided to make it fairly big. I think I definitely could have made it smaller to induce a raise by him, but this is fine as well. And he just folds, which is very noteworthy that he dunked for pot on such a wet board and found a pretty quick fold. Flop top pair on the left, and he checks back in a limped pot. We're just going to lead the turn for value, 3/4 pot. Hope to get called by gut shots, flush draws, random pairs, stuff like that. On the right, he checked back the flop on ace 2-2. When someone checks back this board, you generally have to think that their hand is pretty weak since it's such a good board to c-bet. However, it could also be suspicious, like it could be because he has a 2 or something like that, especially an opponent who doesn't think too much like this one. But we still do have an ace, and we're just going to bet for value and hope to get called. And then the river just going to half pot it again, and hope to get called by a random queen or a jack or something like that. He min raises, which is a pretty dumb situation. We're chopping some of the time if he has a hand like ace 10 or something like that, but I think most of the time I'm just beat, and I can't really call here. It's pretty impossible for me to be ahead, so I just have to find a fold, which I think I do eventually. And then on the left, just half potted it for value with top pair, and got called by a 7. So we're getting into a shorter stack depth in both of these games. To play shorter, there's something called the Nash chart. I'll link that in the video description, and you guys can check that out. But it's basically just how to play, what hands to be shoving pre-flop, for how many big blinds. Keep in mind that when you're using it, you should only be using it under 10 big blinds deep, and you should also only be using it if it's profitable by a couple big blinds. So if, for example, it says shove jack 8 suited for 12 big blinds, I don't know if that's really it, but let's just say it is, shove jack 8 suited for 12 big blinds, and you have exactly 12 big blinds, I probably wouldn't shove it, just because it's a little loose in my opinion against these types of opponents. However, it's still a good rough estimation on what you should be doing with short stack play. On the right here, I min-raised, and he overshifted again. Obviously, I have a real hand this time, so I can snap him off, and we're lucky enough to have him dominated. On the left, it's not the best board to c-bet, seeing that he check raises 40% of the time. So in retrospect, that wasn't the best check raise. However, I'm sorry, that wasn't the best c-bet rather. But hindsight's 20/20, so he does check raise, and we just have to fold. And we hold on the right, so we take the chip lead. Flop bottom pair on the left in a limped pot. He pots it. This guy's been so passive so far that I think it's just a pretty easy fold. It's not going to be a great situation for us afterwards. C-bet the low flop on the right, which is fine, and he folds. This once again, or similarly rather, this is a very draw heavy board. Not a great spot to c-bet with ace king, so we just decide to check back. The turn pair's the queen, and he leads for half pot. He's going to be leading with air a decent amount here. He's going to be leading with draws. He's going to be leading with obviously some pairs like 10x, 9x, or a queen. But we do have a decent amount of outs if we are behind, and like I said, occasionally we are ahead if he has a draw or a total error. So I decide to call. I river a king rather, and I think about it for a while. It's a bit thin. I mean, he could definitely check a queen here, since he'd be afraid of the straight. So it's possible he has a queen and he's just gonna call. It's possible he has a 10, but he's probably not going to call with a 10 if I bet. The only hand I can really bet and get called by is a worse king, so we'd have to have a hand like king 8, something like that, which isn't too often, so I decide to check back eventually, which I'd have to get some feedback on, but it seems fine. I just don't see myself getting called by a much worse hand there too often. C-betting the right's fine, and luckily he folds. I open king 5 on the right here, and he pot 3 bets it. Obviously just have to fold. I min-raise the queens here. If we were a little shorter, I would limp them to hopefully either induce a raise by him or allow him to see a flop and hopefully hit something. But this deep, I think it's a little better to min-raise. Here with the 5s, we're too short to really min-raise it and call his ship. It's not a great situation if he ships a hand like king 7. We don't really want to flip against this guy, so if we can avoid a flip, we will. So I decide to open ship to get more folds, and if he has a hand like ace king or a better pair or whatever, he's going to call anyway, or he would have shoved anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. And he calls with ace 6, which is a pretty awful call by him, but he is flipping, and luckily we find a hold on a pretty ugly board. On the left here, this guy doesn't open too much. He's only opened 25% of hands, and he 3x'd this hand. We're only 21, 22 big blinds deep, so we could ship against an opponent like this who's kind of passive and call-y. I decided to do something a little weird, which is just make it 590. Sometimes you'll play an opponent who will like just call this with like 7-8 and then fold if they miss the flop, which is perfectly fine with me. And that's much better than us shoving and then him just folding the 7-8. So it just gives him a little more rope to hang himself with, while essentially being the same thing as shoving. And we flop pretty much the nuts. No need to bet a lot here. So I decided to bet 180, which is about a tenth of the pot, or not even close. It's more like a sixth of the pot. However, this just once again gives him some rope. It gives him a chance to maybe ship it with a hand like Queen Jack or 7-8, just hopefully have him do something weird. But he just folds. I'd around 10 big blinds deep. With certain hands, I think limping is okay. Right there I had Jack 6. I don't really want to shove with Jack 6, I don't really want to min raise it, and I don't really want to fold it, so limping's really the only option. And he shoves, and we obviously fold. He limps here. In this situation, it doesn't really feel like he'd be trapping me. So I could have pretty much shoved any 2 cards here, but King 5 is definitely a good enough hand to shove. And I expect him to just fold to my shove a very large percentage of the time. Queen 9, 10 big blinds, definitely a shove. Just to note real quick, this spot preflop, I'm much less likely to shove over his limp. Excuse me. To shove over his limp as a bluff, just because I shoved over the last one, so it's a little more likely that he'd be trapping here. So just checking with 7-5 definitely, and I would have been definitely less likely to shove a hand like King 5 in that situation. Queen Jack, I think about shoving for a second, but I decide that min raising is a little better. A hand like Ace 2 is a better hand to shove because Ace 2 doesn't really have anything dominated. In fact, it pretty much has nothing dominated, whereas a hand like Queen Jack has a lot of things dominated. So if I min raise here and he has a hand like Jack 8 suited that he would have folded to if I shipped, now he might ship that Jack 8 suited. So it gives me a much better chance of like getting it in very, very good. With a hand like pocket 2s, pocket 3s, ace 5, stuff like that, I'll just open shove because I'm not thrilled if he ships over it light. Whereas Queen Jack, I'm perfectly fine with getting it in against his shipping range. And he ships it, I snap it off, and we're just going to flip. Unfortunately, we lose that one, but we still have plenty of chips left. So he min raises here, pretty easy ship with the ace 2, even though he doesn't raise that much, just we're too short, we have too good of a hand. Jack 10, Jack 10 is a little different from Queen Jack in that it's not quite good enough to min raise and call a ship with, so Jack 10 I just decided to ship it. And he has ace 4, and we're pretty much flipping again. I think the video might have froze, there we go. So we're lucky enough to win that one. Pocket 3s, definitely got to call the ship with. Even though we're flipping most of the time, we're just way too short to be folding a hand this good. And as you can see, one of those points I made in the first slide, we got to go all in a lot. You're seeing it. It's way more enjoyable than watching any other form of poker, in my opinion. King 10, pretty much the same idea as Queen Jack. We can ship it, but he's just going to ship so many hands that we dominate, like King 9, 10x, stuff like that. It's a little bit better than Jack 10, so we can do the min raise with, rather than just shipping it. Obviously just gotta fold 7-2 off, no reason to get fancy with it. Ace 3, we gotta ship it. As I was saying, a hand like ace 3, ace 2, small aces and small pairs, we can't really get fancy with them. We just have to ship them in when we're short and hopefully get the fold or called by worse or something. Something good happens. King 8, definitely a ship. This is not nearly good enough to min-raise and call a ship with, but it's way too good to fold or limp with, so we're just going to shove and maximize our fold equity. So the blinds are going up again, so we're going to be about 6, 7 big blinds deep. So there's going to be a lot more shoving, and we're going to call off a little bit lighter. A3 off, we can't shove, unfortunately. So we're down to 6.5 big blinds, roughly. Definitely shipping the Queen 9 versus limp. No other option. King 3, definitely a ship for about 9 big blinds. Fortunately, he wakes up with ace 10, and we get a pretty bad flop. And we lose this one, I believe. Yes, so we lose this one. So I probably paused the video until another match started, and here it is. So this is against Landfear 26. This will be quite a bit different from the other games I just played because Landfear, it's a small sample here. He's played 77 games and it's up $1,100. But he was a pretty big winner on PokerStars. So the dynamic will be a little bit different because I'll be playing a decent reg. Whereas playing the fish, we're going to be playing a lot more straightforward. Against this guy, we're going to be playing a little bit more tricky and thinking a little bit more. Looking at his stats, as you can see, he only opens 45% of buttons, which is a very small amount, and he calls in the big blind a pretty good amount and doesn't 3-bet very much. And as you can see, I have a note here that he flatted ace-queen offsuit preflop. So overall, he's just a pretty tight player, and I really like playing tight players because it's pretty easy to run them over some of the time. So this is one of the players that I enjoy playing the most on this site. So the adjustments we're going to be making to this guy, the obvious ones are, since he's only opening 45% of hands and he's limping about 20%, we're not going to be 3-betting hands like Queen Jack for value because he's not opening that many hands. If he was opening more like 80 to 90% of hands, then we could definitely 3-bet a hand like Queen Jack, Queen 10 suited, King 10 for value. But against this guy, it's just not really something we could do. It's too thin against his opening range. Here, we c-bet the King 9-6 flop. It's a fairly draw-heavy board, and this guy check raises a very large amount, almost 20% of the time. So if he check calls this board, I expect his hand to be pretty weak, since it's such a draw-heavy board, and he would fast play most of his big hands. So I decided to go for the double barrel to get him to fold a hand like a 6, pocket 8s, a 9, stuff like that. So I double barrel, and he folds. A pretty obvious adjustment against people who check raise a lot is the few times they do check call, you can assume that their range is very weak since they tend to check raise most of their good hands. So if there's someone who check raises a lot and they check call against you, you can pretty much barrel off against their check calling range very profitably, since their check calling range is going to be so weak. Here, he c-bets 85% of the time, which is a very large percentage. We have two overcards to middle pair, a backdoor flush draw, and a backdoor straight draw. It's a bit of a loose peel, but against this guy, it's definitely okay. Like I said, he does c-bet 85%, and he only double barrels the turn 25%, which means that a lot of the time he's betting the flop and then just giving up on the turn. And because of that, we can expect him to check the turn, and then we can just bet the river and he'll fold, which is called a reverse float. So we can reverse float him pretty easily, not to mention there are a lot of good turn cards for our hand, like this one, like a spade, a 7 or a 9 wouldn't be bad. So, a lot of good stuff that can happen. So he checks back the turn, as we kind of expected him to do, and we do river the straight in this situation, which is good for us, but I expect his range to be very weak. We 3/4 it, and he quickly folds. So it kind of shows that the plan was right. He would have folded the river probably on a brick, so probably correct there. We open King 9 here, pretty standard. Good board to c-bet. He does have a decent amount of ace-x in his range, since he doesn't 3-bet very much, but still a must c-bet. The turn is pairs the ace, which is a good card for us since our king high is more likely good. When the turn goes check-check, if he bet the river here, I would probably call since there are so many missed draws. The one problem is he does check-raise a very large amount, so he probably check-raises his draws. But I think I'd still probably find a call if he bet here. He ends up checking, and we just happily check back and take it down. And he did have a flush draw, so he didn't check raise a flush draw, which is very notable. I didn't notice that when we played this match. Against this guy's preflop stats, we're pretty much opening any 2 cards against him, other than the very bottom of my range, just because he's folding so much and he's not 3-betting very much. So it's a good player to open most hands against. Since this guy check raises a lot, we have to check back a board like this with bottom pair. He's just going to check raise and we're going to have to fold, and that's not good. So we're just going to check back and try to get the hand to showdown. And obviously just going to be checking down once the board runs out, like it did. And we win. So once again over here we got this Michael B66 guy. This is the same guy we played earlier, who is fairly spazzy. So we'll remember how we played against him last time and try to make the same adjustments we did then. Over here on the left, he limps and I check ace-6. Hands like ace-6, ace-7, ace-8, ace-9, they're not really good hands to raise against a limp. The reason being is that when we raise a hand like ace-7 and the flop and he calls and the flop comes ace-9-3, something like that, they're going to think you have the ace. Since you raised preflop, they're going to assume you have an ace in your hand, and they're right, we do have an ace in our hand. So if we check a hand like ace-7, ace-6, ace-8, ace-9, when we play back at them on an ace-high board, they're going to be less likely to believe us, since they're going to think we would have raised with our aces preflop. Additionally, we want to only be raising the stronger aces in our range, just for balance, and since those hands play much better against their limp calling range. So checking ace-6 is pretty standard, just like I would have checked ace-8 or ace-7 or ace-9 as well. And check calling this board would have been fine, but I guess I decided to fold. On the right, we open Jack-3 off, which against this guy isn't ideal. He does 3-bet quite a bit, but it's early in this match. We don't know if he's going to be playing the exact same way. So it's not the worst open, but later, like normally, I don't think it's a fantastic open against someone who's 3-betting this much. Luckily we do flop bottom and top pair, and he leads into us for pot. When people lead into you for pot, I usually don't really believe it. No one really does this with top pair. They don't really do it with middle pair. They usually do it with a draw or just total air, stuff like that. Nonetheless, it is a very draw-heavy board, so we pretty much have to raise, just try to get some chips in there and try to build the pot. So we make it 220, he calls. The turn obviously counterfeits our 2-pair, it's not a very good card, and he ships it into us for almost triple the pot. This is a really interesting spot, and if I had more time in the time bank, I probably would have thought about it for longer. But like I said, when people lead into you for pot on the flop, it's just so rarely a big hand, and there are so many draws on this board that I think his range is much more likely to have a draw in it than an actual big hand. Not to mention the obvious factor that it's pretty unlikely someone would just hit trips and just ship it. Like, especially a player who's kind of inexperienced like this guy, I'd expect him to be in the more slow play mentality and check it to me and try to get me to bet if he actually had trips. So I don't really believe him too much here. So I do decide to call. On the left, he c-bets a ton. Pretty easy situation to just check call with our top pair. Turn's not a great card, but if he were to bet it, I would call since it's a good card to double barrel, and I expect him to know that since he is an experienced player. And on the right, he does show up with a flush draw, and luckily we are able to fade it. And on the left, the river is a pretty terrible card. Jack 10 got there, Queen X got, like Queen 10s, Queen Jacks, all that stuff got there. And he 3/4s it, so we just have to fold. And I do believe this is the last game, so once this game is over, we'll end the video. Standard open and c-bet with 4s. It's a bit of a draw-heavy board, but you know, we don't have much of a choice with pocket 4s. There's no other way to play it. We just have to c-bet and hope to take it down. Yeah, okay, good. Jack 3 should definitely be an open against him. It's way too good of a hand to be folding against someone as tight as he is. So we flop top pair and definitely going to go ahead and c-bet. Obviously on that dry board we would have c-bet with pretty much anything since it's pretty easy to get a fold there against him. We pick up aces and we're definitely going to 3-bet to my standard size of 5 big blinds. Sorry about that. I decided to c-bet a little smaller than usual on this flop. The main reason is just to induce a little bit more. Hopefully he'll be more likely to call with a hand like Queen 9 or something. He's going to call with a jack either way, going to call with a king either way. Maybe by betting this much we'll induce a raise out of some kind of air or a draw, something like that. So it just kind of opens the door a little bit for him to do some more stuff by betting 160 instead of betting 200 or 240. And he peels. And the turn's a pretty good card. It gives a lot of his hands pairs, like if he has a hand like Queen 10 or Jack 10, stuff like that. Now they have a draw or now they have a pair. So it improves a lot of his hands. Obviously, some of his hands do get there. Queen Jack makes 2 pair, King Queen makes 2 pair, etc. But we're not too worried about that. There's only a few combos of hands. We definitely have to just bet here for value and hope he calls and then ship the river for value as well. Guess I decided to go 380, which is fine. Could maybe even go bigger since he's not going to fold a hand like Queen 10, King 10, Jack 10. He's just not going to fold that stuff. He has too many outs, too good of equity, and you know, we're in really good shape against those hands, so we can just make it like 420, 440, even bigger. But 380 is fine as well. And he folds pretty quickly, which means he probably had a jack, since that was a pretty bad turn for Jack X. So in a limped pot, we flop bottom pair. Definitely going to call when he bets. And when he double barrels, he doesn't double barrel too much, so we can find a pretty easy fold. Nine two off can be an open against him, but obviously it's one of the worst hands we can be dealt, so folding is totally fine as well. On a board like this, I mean, there's no real move we can make at any point. We can't really represent anything on that board, so we just have to check it down and give up. Pretty good board to c-bet. Fairly dry ace-high board, which we can rep easily, so we c-bet and he folds. This actually is a pretty interesting hand. We're only, what is this, 17 big blinds deep to start the hand here, and we have queen 5, we open, he calls, pretty standard. This flop isn't the best board to c-bet for my hand. I have a lot of backdoor draws, and we're pretty short, and I don't really want to get check raised when I have a hand like this. It may sound weird since it's only queen high, but my hand is too good to get check raised. Obviously, if he does check raise, I pretty much have to fold. So I could check back a hand like this if I turn a good card like a queen 5 or something that gives me a draw like a 6, a deuce, a diamond, all that stuff. It puts me in a really good situation when I turn that. So I think I would have preferred checking back. And then he check raises to 300, I believe. Yeah. And this is, I thought about this for a little bit as well. It may look like an easy fold, but this guy check raises quite a bit, and we do have not fantastic but okay equity against some of his hands. Like if he has a king, we're about 20%, I think, with all of our backdoor draws. Maybe not quite that much, but if he has a 4 or a 3, which is unlikely but possible, we're in decent shape against them. And then, not to mention, I just feel like he has a total error or a draw here a decent amount of the time. So if he has a hand like 5-6, 5-7, some kind of diamond draw, we're usually going to have that hand beat. Even if we're only slightly ahead, we're going to be ahead. And then I think some of the time he also has just total error, hand like 7-8, something like that. And if we shifted, he would fold. However, I decided it's a little too high variance. And as you can see right there, I scrolled over his name and double-clicked to look at his stats for this session. Hopefully I can nail it. Let's see. I can't stop it on the time, but his check raise stat was 0 for this match. And because of that, I generally think that like he's not really in a check raising mood, as weird as it sounds, in this match. So I think he's less likely to be check raising light, especially since this is his first check raise of the game. So with all those factors in mind, I just decided to fold and take the safer route and find a better spot. Not to mention, I don't really want to spew off on my first video. Queen 8 probably would have flatted if he opened. He's been really tight this game. He's only opening 36% in this particular game, but Queen 8 suited is too good of a hand to fold to an open preflop. Pretty standard open with ace-6 offsuit preflop there. If he were to have shipped over my min raise there with when I had ace-6, I probably would have just folded. He doesn't ship that much. He only 3-bets 9% overall, and I can't expect him to be shipping too many worse hands than ace-6. Same idea with ace-5, probably just going to fold if he ships it, but definitely have to open. And we are too deep to just open shove like I was talking about earlier. 20 big blinds is much too deep. If we were around 15 big blinds, then shoving would be totally fine, but 20 is just too much. If we had a hand like pocket 4s, however, at 20 big blinds, then shoving is much better, since pocket 4s is pretty rarely behind, and very often flipping, which is much better than ace-5, whereas with a hand like ace-5, you're pretty much never ahead, and very easily dominated. Five-7, it's an okay open since he's so tight. This is a fairly draw-heavy board, so I'd expect them to check raise a decent amount. However, we only have 7 high, so we can't really check back and try to get to showdown, since we're not going to win at showdown. We have 7 high, and we do have an open ender, so it's an okay board to c-bet. And he calls, and like I talked about earlier, when someone check calls, when they check raise a lot, like this guy does in this spot, I don't expect his range to be very strong. If he had a 10, or a big hand like a straight, I think he would have check raised it on the flop, especially on such a draw heavy flop. So I expect his range to pretty much be like weak draws, or like an 8, or maybe a 9, and especially on a great card like an ace, I can represent the ace and double barrel him off of a hand like an 8. So I double barrel here. Not to mention we do have a decent amount of outs if we are behind. And he folds. So it looks like we're down to 15, 16 and a half big blinds here. It's pretty standard min raise with 9-10 offsuit. Hand flops pretty well, but we're too deep to ship it. Good board to c-bet. It's tough for him to have much on this board. He check raises, which is really weird, but we have 10 high, so there's not much we could do. If he has a flush draw, we're not in good shape against that. If he has a queen, we're obviously drawing dead, so just gotta fold. Pocket sixes. This is a situation where I could just open shove the pocket sixes for 20 big blinds pre-flop, but pocket six, I definitely would have just shoved with pocket fives. But pocket sixes are pretty much right on the cusp of where you want to be min raising. When you have pocket sixes, you dominate a lot more hands. With pocket sixes, you dominate ace 6, ace 5, ace 4, ace 3, ace 2, obviously. You dominate all the smaller pairs than pocket sixes, and he's definitely going to shove all those hands. So, well, at least I think he would. So, min-raising pocket sixes is fine. However, I would recommend that most people should just open ship them for this stack depth, just because it's much easier to play. With a little bit more experience, you can find a min-raise, since you'll know how to play post-flop when he does flat. Pretty good board to c-bet, very dry. He calls, and the turn's a king. No reason to double barrel. We beat a 3, we lose to an 8. He's not going to fold either of them. So it's a little too thin to bet for value, and it's not really a good spot to bet his bluff, so we're just going to check it back, try to get to showdown. The river's a 10, which completes backdoor hearts. It doesn't look like it, but I actually considered shipping it here as a bluff. If he has an 8 or even a 10 here, he really can't call if I ship it. But occasionally he can have a king, very rarely since he check raises most of his good hands, but occasionally he can have a king, and occasionally he can have backdoored hearts. So it's a little high variance, not to mention I just think I have too much showdown value with sixes. I'm just going to be good so much of the time here that I don't really have to turn my hand into a bluff. So I just decided to check back. And he does have a 3. I believe he had ace 3. Yeah. So that's pretty notable that he didn't shove with ace 3 preflop for 20 big blinds. It's a pretty good spot for him to just ship it. Luckily for him, he didn't, since I would have called with sixes. But it's a very notable thing to see that he doesn't shove with ace 3 there. Against someone who check raises as much as this guy does, checking back middle pair on this board's fine play, especially because last hand we saw that he's capable of flatting with weak aces preflop when we're short, so I check back with my queen. And then the turn brings a bunch of draws. He can have a 9, a 4, a worse queen, so we're just going to bet for value, and he folds. Now we're 10 big blinds deep, and he ships it, obviously calling with ace 8 suited. And unfortunately he turns the nuts, but we still have plenty of chips left, so no worries. King 8 suited, definitely just shipping it for 10 big blinds. I could ship it for up to 15 big blinds. It's a really good hand to ship when you're short. Queen 9 off, he ships it. Against some opponents, you can call when they ship it for 10 big blinds. But this guy's way too tight pre-flop. I don't think he's shoving anything worse, so I just have to fold. Obviously chipping with ace-7, and he calls with king-queen. And we hold. And he shifts it, and we obviously call with ace-3. 10 big blinds deep, no real option. It was pretty unlucky for him to have ran into so many of our ace-x. If we had had the same hands he did, we would have lost the game as well. So there's not much he could have done there. He was just unlucky to wake up with so many worse hands than us at the higher blind levels. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed watching my first video. Hope you learned a bit. Any feedback, anything you'd want me to do in future videos, let me know in the comments, email me, do whatever you have to do. And I hope you enjoyed watching. This is Mike for iPokerVIP.net.